I realized my wife stopped needing me before I realized I was losing her. And the worst part, I thought I was being a good husband the whole time. If you had asked me what kind of man I was, I would have said, I take care of my family. That was always my answer. Not, I'm a great husband. Not, I'm emotionally present. Not even, I make her happy. Just, I take care of things. I was 42. Married for 15 years, 2 kids. Mason, 11, and Chloe, 8. We lived outside Chicago. Suburbs. Cold winters, loud summers. Neighbors who knew just enough about you to say hello, but not enough to ask real questions. My wife, Danielle, worked part-time at a dental office. I ran a small HVAC business. Long days, early mornings, calls at all hours. The kind of job that makes you feel needed. That was important to me. Feeling needed. At home, I had a role. Provider, fixer, problem solver. If something broke, I fixed it. If something needed to be paid, I handled it. If something needed to be decided, I made the call. And in my mind, that made me a good husband. Because everything was taken care of. Danielle used to say things like, you don't have to do everything. And I'd laugh. Someone has to. At the time, that felt like responsibility. Now I understand. It also created distance. Because when one person does everything, the other person slowly stops needing them. Danielle used to need me. Not for money, not for decisions, for everything else. She'd ask my opinion on things that didn't matter, tell me about her day in detail, pull me into conversations that had no purpose other than being close. And I used to engage. At least, I think I did. But over time, I started answering instead of connecting. There's a difference. She'd say something, and I'd solve it, offer a solution, give advice, fix the problem, and then move on. Because in my mind, that's what I was supposed to do. There's one moment I keep coming back to. Because it didn't seem important, but now I know it was. Danielle was sitting at the kitchen table, talking about someone at work. A situation, some tension, something that bothered her. I don't even remember the details. I remember what I said. Why don't you just talk to her and get it over with? Simple, logical, efficient. She went quiet, just for a second, then nodded. Yeah, I guess. And that was it. Conversation over. Problem solved. At least that's what I thought. But looking back, I didn't help her. I shut her down. Because she wasn't asking for a solution. She was asking to be heard. That pattern repeated. Over and over. She'd bring something. I'd fix it. End of interaction. No space, no depth, no connection. And slowly, she stopped bringing things. At first, I thought that was a good thing. Less problems. Less conversations that went nowhere. Peace. That's what I called it. Peace. But it wasn't peace. It was silence. Danielle became more independent. Again, that sounds like a positive thing. And at first, it was. She stopped asking my opinion. Stopped checking in before making decisions. Stopped needing reassurance. She just handled things. At the time, I told myself, she's strong. She doesn't need me for small things anymore. What I didn't realize was this. She didn't need me at all anymore. The kids started going to her for everything. Homework, problems, emotions. I became background, not absent, just secondary. One night, Danielle said something that should have stopped everything. We were in bed. Lights off. She said quietly, I feel like I'm alone in this marriage sometimes. I didn't even turn toward her. That's not true, I said. Because in my mind, it wasn't. I was there. I provided. I showed up. How could she be alone? She didn't argue. Didn't push. Just said, okay. And turned away. That was it. That should have been the moment. The one where I asked questions. The one where I leaned in. But I didn't. Because nothing felt broken enough. That's the danger. When things don't explode, you assume they're fine. A few weeks later, something small changed. Danielle started going out more. Not dramatically. Just occasionally. Dinner with friends. Coffee. Work events. Normal things. Healthy things. At least, that's what I told myself. She also started dressing differently. Again, nothing extreme. Just more effort. More attention. More intention. I noticed. Of course I did. But I didn't question it. Because why would I? Everything still looked normal. One evening, she came home later than usual. Kids already asleep. I was in the living room. Hey, she said. Hey, how was it? Good. What did you do? Just talk. That answer felt incomplete. But I didn't push. Because pushing requires curiosity. And somewhere along the line, I stopped being curious about my own wife. The next change was harder to ignore. Danielle started smiling at her phone. Not constantly, just enough. A message would come in. She'd look down, and something in her face would change. Softer, lighter, like she was somewhere else for a second. Then she put the phone down. Continue. I noticed it, but I explained it away. Friends, group chats, work, normal. Everything has a normal explanation. If you don't want to look deeper. One night, we were sitting on the couch. Same positions as always. TV on. Phones in hand. She said, "Do you ever feel like we don't really need each other anymore?" That question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked. She shrugged. "I don't know. It just feels like we're both fine on our own." I laughed. "That's a good thing." She looked at me. Really looked. And for a second, there was something in her eyes I didn't recognize. Then she nodded. "Yeah," she said. "A good thing." That was the moment. I just didn't realize it yet. A few nights later, I came home early. Unexpectedly. The house was quiet. Kids upstairs. Danielle in the kitchen. Phone on the counter. Screen lit. Unlocked. And this time, I didn't look away. The message was already there. I didn't need to pick up the phone. I didn't need to search. It was just open. Like I had walked into something that had been happening long enough to forget it needed to be hidden. The screen lit the edge of the counter. And the message read, "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." I stood there. Still. Because that sentence didn't belong to a casual conversation. It wasn't a joke. That IT wasn't small talk. It was personal. Intimate in a quiet way. The kind of sentence you don't send unless you've already been having deeper conversations for a while. My chest tightened. Not sharply. Slow. Like something settling into place. Because suddenly, everything started making sense. The way she stopped coming to me. The way she stopped asking. The way she stopped needing. It wasn't that she didn't need support. She just found it somewhere else. Another message came in. Right under it. "I like the way you think through things." That one hit differently. Because it used to be my role. I was the one who handled things. The one who thought through problems. The one she came to when something felt complicated. Now, someone else had taken that place. And I hadn't even noticed when it happened. I stepped back from the counter. Slowly. Like I might break something if I moved too fast. And I walked into the living room. Sat down. Stared at nothing. Because in that moment, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was aware. And awareness is worse at first. Because it makes everything you ignored suddenly feel intentional. I didn't confront her right away. I know how that sounds. But it wasn't fear. It was not knowing what version of my life I was about to step into. Because once you say it out loud, there's no going back. A few minutes later, Danielle walked into the living room. Dried her hands on a towel. "Hey," she said. "Hey." I watched her. Really watched her. For the first time in a long time. She looked the same. Same face. Same movements. But something felt different. Like I was looking at someone who had already moved forward. And was just waiting for me to catch up. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah." Same answer. Same pattern. But now, I knew what was behind it. Dinner was normal. Kids talking. Danielle listening. Really listening. Smiling. Engaged. I sat there watching it happen. And something clicked. She hadn't changed. Not completely. She was still capable of connection. Still present. Still her. Just not with me. After dinner, the kids went upstairs. Danielle stayed in the kitchen. Cleaning. Same routine. Same movements. But now, every small detail felt different. The way she checked her phone between plates. The way her face softened for a split second. The way she turned it face down when I looked up. I stood in the doorway. Watching. Then I said it. "I saw your messages." She froze. Just for a second. But enough. "What?" she said. Not confused. Just buying time. In the kitchen. Silence. Then she turned off the water. Set the plate down. And looked at me. "What did you see?" That question again. Not denial. Not panic. Just control. "I saw enough," I said. Her eyes dropped. Then back up. And something shifted. Because she didn't try to explain it away. Didn't rush to fix it. Didn't pretend it wasn't what it was. She just stood there. Like the truth had already been accepted. Just not spoken. "How long?" I asked. Same question. Different story. She took a breath. "A while." That answer. Always the same. Safe. Vague. Not real. "How long, Danielle?" She looked at me. And this time, She didn't hesitate. A few months. Months. Of course. Not a mistake. Not a moment. Something that had time to grow. And it's not just talking, I said. Not a question. She shook her head. No. Just that. No explanation. No defense. Just truth. Are you seeing him? That question changed everything. Because it forced a line. She hesitated. Just enough. Then, yes. Quiet. But clear. I nodded once. No reaction. No explosion. Just confirmation. Because at that point, I already knew. I just needed to hear it. How many times? I don't know. That answer again. I almost expected it. I don't know doesn't mean not knowing. It means not wanting to define it. Do you love him? That question hung in the air. Because now, this wasn't about actions. It was about meaning. She looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, she didn't answer right away. I don't know, she said. Of course. But this time, it felt different. Because now it wasn't avoidance. It was confusion. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Why? I asked. That was the real question. Not who. Not how long. Why? She didn't answer immediately. She wiped her hands on a towel. Looked down. Then said, because I didn't have to be strong all the time. That sentence landed hard. Because it cut through everything else. It wasn't about him. It was about relief. I never asked you to be strong all the time, I said. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Not directly. But in the way I lived. It was. She shook her head slightly. You didn't have to, she said. You just took everything on. There was no space for me to be anything but okay. That hit. Because I understood it. I had been solving everything. Handling everything. Being the one who carried it all. And in doing that, I left no room for her to be vulnerable. I thought I was helping, I said. She nodded. I know. That was worse than anything else. Because it meant my intentions didn't matter. The result did. We stood there. Two people in the same kitchen. Looking at each other like strangers who knew too much. Upstairs, I heard the kids. Laughter. Movement. Life continuing. Normal. Except it wasn't. Not anymore. Does he know about me? I asked. Yes. What did you tell him? That you're a good man. That hit. Harder than expected. And a husband. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. I nodded slowly. Then asked the only question that mattered now. Are you leaving? She looked at me. And for the first time, she didn't have an answer ready. I don't know. That answer again. But now, it meant something else. It meant she hadn't decided. Which meant, she was already somewhere else. She stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. I didn't plan this, she said. I nodded. Yeah, I said. Neither did I. And that was the truth. Not clean. Not simple. But real. The worst part wasn't that there was someone else. It was that he gave her something I didn't even realize she needed. And by the time I finally saw it, it was already too late to pretend nothing had changed. Too late. That was the feeling sitting under everything. Not just betrayal. Not just anger. Not even heartbreak in the clean way people talk about it, like it arrives all at once and points in one direction. This felt messier than that. Because standing there in my own kitchen, listening to my wife tell me she found comfort in another man, I also had to face something I had spent years avoiding. I had built a marriage where she learned to survive without needing me emotionally. And once a person learns how to do that, they don't always come back. Danielle stood across from me with the dish towel, still in her hands, twisting it slowly, like her body needed something to do while the truth sat between us. I asked, who is he? My voice sounded flatter than I expected. Maybe because by then, I knew the name wasn't going to shock me. The damage was already there to name just gives the damage a face. Chris, she said. Of course it was something ordinary. That's another thing nobody tells you. The people who enter your marriage don't arrive with villain music. They usually sound like somebody you've met 100 times, that a name from work, that a dad from school, that a number in a phone. Just a normal man, standing in the doorway of a weak place. How do you know him? He came in as a patient first, she said. Then I saw him again later through one of the moms from school. Then we started talking. There it was. Not one big choice, but a series of little ones. That's how most lines get crossed. I guess that I in steps small enough to explain until suddenly you're miles from where you started. How long have you been seeing him? That question landed heavier than I expected. Not because I didn't want the answer, because I did, but because a duration turns hurt into structure. IT tells you how long your life has been happening in two versions. Danielle looked at the counter. Not me. Since the spring. Spring. I actually did the math in my head. Spring meant school pickup, summer break, back-to-school shopping, my birthday, Chloe's dance recital, Mason's baseball games, all of it happening while another story ran underneath the visible one. I let out a breath through my nose and looked away. Did you sleep with him? She answered immediately. No. Fast enough that I believed her, or at least believed she believed that answer mattered most. Sometimes people cling to the one line they didn't cross, like it cancels the road that led right up to it. But emotional betrayal has its own weight, sometimes heavier, because it isn't just about the body, that it's about where the inner life went. So what is this? I asked. What do you call it? She looked tired suddenly. I don't know. I laughed once, low and humorless. You seem to not know a lot for someone living a whole second life. That landed. Good, I wanted it to. Her face tightened, and for a second I thought she might get angry enough to make the conversation easier. Anger at least gives you somewhere to stand. Instead, she said, You think I wanted this to happen? No, I said. I think you let it. Silence. Heavy, sharp, real. I hated how true that felt. And I hated even more that part of the same truth pointed back at me. Because people like me love to think marriages fail because of some dramatic outside force, some seduction, some midlife collapse, some obvious betrayal you can circle in red and say there. That's where everything broke. But more often, the break happens earlier, in the atmosphere, in the repetition, in all the moments one person reaches emotionally and the other offers logistics, advice, solutions, patience. Everything except vulnerability. I sat down at the table because my legs suddenly felt too aware of themselves. Danielle stayed standing. That bothered me in a stupid, symbolic way. Like she was already less part of the room. Did you tell him you were unhappy? I asked. She took too long to answer. Danielle. Yes. I nodded once. And what did you say? That I felt alone. That I was always the one holding things together emotionally. That I didn't feel seen. Every sentence came out careful, almost gentle. That made them worse. Cruelty I could have fought. Gentle truth just sat there and worked on me from the inside. I wanted to defend myself, that I wanted to say I held plenty together. The bills, the house, the repairs, the decisions, the practical weight of a family, that I wanted to say maybe if she'd appreciated that more, this conversation wouldn't be happening. And maybe there was some truth there too. But I also knew what she meant. Knew it immediately. Knew it because it had been my whole operating system for years. I took care of things. That had become my whole identity. And if a problem couldn't be solved with money, scheduling, advice, or action, I didn't know what to do with it except reduce it. I thought that made me stable. To someone married to me, it probably felt like emotional exile. Did he tell you what you wanted to hear? I asked. Danielle shook her head. No. Then what? He listened. That line again. I don't know why those two words can do so much damage, but they can. He listened. Not fixed, not rescued, not transformed. Just listened. And somehow that was enough to get a place in my marriage I had left unguarded for years. I looked toward the staircase then, listening to the soft sounds of the kids upstairs. Do Mason and Chloe know anything? No, Danielle said quickly. Nothing. They know we've been distant. They know the house feels weird sometimes. But not this. Not this. I wondered what exactly this even was anymore. An affair, an attachment, a confession, an ending trying to introduce itself without using the word. I asked, have they met him? Her head came up immediately. No. Again, I believed her. That mattered more than maybe it should have. At least there was one line, still standing in the rubble. Then I asked the question I had been circling the whole time. Are you leaving me? Danielle looked at me, and in her face I saw the part that hurts more than anger. Hesitation. Not certainty. Not refusal. Hesitation. That's when you know you're not really arguing with your spouse anymore, that you're standing in the waiting room of a decision they've already started making without you. I don't know, she said. I almost smiled from exhaustion. That answer again. It's the truth. No, I said. It's the safest version of the truth. She crossed her arms then, not defensive, more like she was cold. What do you want me to say? I leaned forward. I want you to tell me whether the life we built still matters enough to you to protect it. That one shook the room a little. Not because I yelled. Because I didn't. Because finally the question wasn't about Chris or messages or vague emotional language. It was about the structure. The thing underneath all of it. Danielle looked down at the floor. And there it was again. Too much silence. That told me before she spoke. I don't know what's left, she said. There are sentences that hurt because they accuse you. Then there are sentences that hurt because they describe reality. This was the second kind. I leaned back and looked at the ceiling. A smoke detector needed a battery that I'd noticed a low chirp 2 days earlier and forgotten to replace it. Funny what your brain grabs when something worse is happening. What did you imagine? I asked quietly. She frowned. What? You said you don't know what's left. You said you felt alone. You let this thing with him become real enough that you're standing here, unable to tell me you want to end it. So what did you imagine? What did life look like in your head? Danielle stared at me for a long time. Then she said the one word I wasn't prepared for. Quieter. That hit harder than better would have. Because better would have made Chris the point. Some fantasy, some romance, some obvious emotional replacement. But quieter made me the point. Life with me hadn't been explosive, that IT hadn't been abusive, that IT hadn't even been dramatic. It had just been loud in the wrong ways, full of responsibilities, instructions, solve problems, practical decisions, subtle emotional pressure at a life where she always had to have it together because I was already handling everything. I rubbed both hands over my face. I thought I was helping, I said. I know, she answered. That was the problem. She knew that I knew. Intentions were standing right there in the room with us, completely useless. We heard footsteps then. Small, quick ones. Chloe appeared first, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, hair half out of her braid, eyes squinting against the kitchen light. Mason came behind her, annoyed in that older brother way, probably because she woke him up and he'd followed out of instinct more than concern. Why are you both awake? Danielle asked too quickly. Chloe looked from her to me. Why are you both awake? Kids ask the most dangerous questions in the simplest words. Nobody answered fast enough. That was answer enough. Mason shifted his weight and looked at us harder. He was at that age where he still wanted reassurance, but had already started distrusting easy versions of it. Are you guys fighting? He asked. I hate that question because it sounds so manageable that AS if fighting is the worst case scenario, AS if volume is the danger. Sometimes the most damaging thing isn't fighting. It's the silence before it, the drift, the emotional disappearance kids feel long before adults are willing to name it. Danielle stepped toward them. No, honey, we're just talking. Chloe didn't move. You look weird. That almost broke me. Not because it was articulate, because it was perfect. Yes, that we looked weird. Two parents standing in a kitchen at midnight, trying to hold a marriage together with the last available pieces, while pretending the children in the doorway weren't already absorbing the shockwave. Mason looked at me then. Did something happen? There it was. Not details, just the shape of truth. I walked closer, crouched a little so I wasn't towering over them, and said the only thing I knew was fully true. Your mom and I are having a hard conversation. Chloe's face tightened around the blanket. Are we okay? That question. Always that question. Kids don't ask whether the love is damaged or the intimacy is gone or the trust is fractured. They ask about the unit, the structure, the safety. Are we okay? Danielle put a hand over her mouth that I could see tears already collecting in her eyes. I answered before she had to. We love you, I said. That hasn't changed. Mason held my gaze, trying to decide whether that was enough. Chloe looked straight at Danielle. Danielle nodded quickly. Always. Both of you. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't what they asked either. They asked whether the family was okay, and I didn't have that answer. Mason put a hand on Chloe's shoulder and guided her back a step. We should go back upstairs, he said quietly. She nodded, still looking at us. When they disappeared into the hallway, the house felt different. Once your children ask whether the family is okay, whatever private emotional mess you are living in becomes something else. No more adult abstraction. And no more, we're just going through something. Now there are witnesses. Now there is impact beyond your own pain. Danielle sat down finally, across from me this time, and cried without trying very hard to hide it. I didn't go to her. Not because I didn't care, because pity and anger were tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them. After a while, I asked the question that mattered most. Are you willing to end it with him? She looked up slowly, and the expression on her face told me everything before she spoke. Not because it was love that I still don't know if it was love, but because losing him had become something she could feel, something real enough to mourn. And that's the true moment of terror in a marriage like this. Not when you discover the messages, but when you realize the outside person is no longer hypothetical. They're attached to grief.to possibility.to, a version of life your spouse has emotionally rehearsed. I don't know how to do that without, she stopped. Without what? Without feeling like I'm losing the only place I can breathe. That sentence landed like a physical thing, because it told me exactly what Chris had become. Not just a man, not just an escape, a breathing space. And once your spouse experiences another person that way, you are not just competing with attraction, you are competing with relief. If you're listening to this and your relationship feels off, not dramatic, not explosive, just thinner than it used to be, don't wait for hard proof. Don't wait for an unlocked phone on the counter. Don't wait for your wife to stop bringing her inner life home. Don't wait until your children can feel the emotional weather before you can. Most marriages don't collapse in one event. They get efficient. They get quiet point one person stops asking, the other stops noticing, and then someone else steps into the space that was abandoned, so gradually nobody panics until it's already occupied. Danielle betrayed me, that's true. But the thing that shook me most wasn't that another man was in the picture. It was realizing that, by the time I finally paid attention, my wife wasn't deciding whether to talk to him anymore. She was deciding whether life without me might actually feel easier.